The first one, rule number one, is connect, listen, and share. To talk about this one, I want to bring us to Baltimore in the early 1980s. Young organizer named Arnie Graff comes to Baltimore to help revive this organization called BUILD. And what he found was kind of a broken down, fragmented, disconnected organization lacking in energy. Now, the way that Arnie Graff always operated, whenever he went to a new city, and he had previously worked in San Antonio, New York, Washington, D.C., and also Chicago, where he worked with this young organizer named Barack Obama. Wherever Arnie Graff went, all he did for months was talk to people and ask them what mattered to them. He would go to a minister or a local business person or a local elected official or someone on a school board or a principal, and he would say, what matters to you? I have no agenda here, no agenda whatsoever. Just tell me, or what are the issues? What are the hopes? What are the dreams? What are the agendas that you would like to pursue? At the end of the meeting, he would say, okay, now, if there was a disaster at 2 o'clock in the morning, who would you call who you could definitely depend on? And then they would tell him who that was, and then he would go see that person. And then he would go to that person and say, who would you call at 2 o'clock in the morning? Well, one of the persons that he was told by many, many people to go see was a little church lady elementary school teacher named Marion Dixon. And he went to see Miss Dixon. She only agreed because, as a favor to the priest, I'll talk to you. And so he goes to her living room, he talks to her, and she says, now I have to tell you, I don't do politics. I'm not interested in politics. I'm a teacher. And he said, I understand, but you still care about your community, right? And she said, yes, I do care about my community. So I said, okay, well, let's talk about it. And at the end of their conversation, he said, can we talk again? This was really fantastic. And she said, well, we can, but I'm not really interested in politics. And he said, I understand. I just want to learn a little bit more from you. And he started to learn about her past. And she was an African American. And she grew up in St. Mary's County, which is a small, kind of isolated tobacco fishing community, 60 or so, 70 miles south of Washington, D.C. And St. Mary's County was a deeply, deeply segregated community. And she told about the time that she went to the church and she asked her sister, hey, why do we have to sit in the back? And he said, well, that's where the Negroes are supposed to sit. And she said, that's not right. I said, yeah, well, that's just how it works. And so she said, well, I'm not sitting here. I'm going up front. So she goes up front, caused a big stir in the congregation. Finally, the deacons came over. They said, Marion, you're not allowed to be here. And she said, but I want to be here. And then the priest came out and she said, Marion, you know, the way it works is you're not supposed to sit here. Negroes go in the back. And she said, but I can't hear you. And he said, well, I'll talk louder. She said, no, I want to stay here. Finally, the deacons carried her to the back. Next week, she goes straight for the front. Deacons come, they carry her back. Next week, sits in the front, deacons carry her back. Finally, they gave up. So young Marion Dixon desegregated this church in very, very deeply segregated St. Mary's County. And this is when Arnie knew that he had something on his hands. Finally, he asked her, would you be willing to go to an action? An action is the term that is used for some kind of direct encounter with someone in power. You have an agenda, you have an issue you want to raise, and you raise it directly with the person of authority. And you demand that they give you an answer or a schedule or a plan or a process in order to deal with that issue. And she said, well, you know, as I told you, I don't do politics. And he said, yeah, I know, but you don't have to do anything, just watch. So she goes, and the topic in that particular occasion was boarding up buildings in Baltimore. Baltimore had this incredible abandonment in the 70s and 80s. Gangs and drug dealers were using them as their place to do business, and they would kind of take planks off the side of the house and burn them. At the end of this meeting, after pressing, the housing authorities agreed to an experiment for changing the way they boarded up buildings so that they would not be used for firewood, so they would last for a longer time. And Marion walks out of that meeting and said, man, we've been trying to get something done for like a half a year, and you guys do it in one meeting. This is really incredible. So that went on, and finally Arnie said, would you be willing to lead an action? And she's petrified at that, but by this time she's into it, and she realizes that this is a real formula for not only learning what people want and what they need, but also learning how to talk to people in power. And so they happened to have a meeting with Mayor William Donald Schaefer, or Mayor Annoyed, because that's what always the headline was in the Baltimore Sun, Mayor Annoyed. She was at the meeting with Mayor Annoyed, and they were kind of pushing their agenda. He was pushing back. Mayor Schaefer was the classic old-style bully. And at one point in this meeting, this is Arnie Graff telling me this, at one point in this meeting, Melonhead is getting red. And she puts his hand on his hand and said, you know, that's not good for you. And so by the end of the meeting, though, they had another meeting with him, and they ended up resolving these issues satisfactorily. End of the story. Marion Dixon ends up being the president of BUILD, which is now the most powerful grassroots force in the city of Baltimore. There's not a politician in Baltimore who does not feel obliged to go before the BUILD group with hundreds of people showing up at these meetings with clear agendas of what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. They have guarantees for employment if you graduate from high school, healthcare, housing, a whole variety of issues that they've managed to make real progress on as a result of BUILD, led for many years anyway, by Marion Dixon, the little church lady who was not interested in politics. She doesn't do that. I love this story because it tells the power of listening. It's interesting. There's a lot of words for talking in politics, lobbying and buttonholing, and of course the name parliament comes from the French word parler, to speak. But there's no political words for écouter, for listening. But listening is probably the single most powerful skill that you can develop in politics. And Arnie Graff and his organization, they build everything they do around what they call one-on-ones or relational meetings, which is how Arnie met Miss Dixon way back when. That's rule number one for me. Before you do anything, don't presume you know anything about the community that you're going into. Make a concerted effort to listen, share, follow up, and then also ask, who do you call at 2 in the morning if you need help?